It is said that there are places on this earth where sound learns to rest. The chapter opens beneath a moon that hangs low and pale, as if uncertain whether to rise any higher. A vast plateau stretches outward, quiet and unmarked, its surface washed in silver light. No road leads here. No map agrees on how one might arrive. The ground is bare stone and fine dust, and yet there is a feeling soft but unmistakable that the land is awake, not alert, not watchful, but breathing, slowly, more slowly than men ever could. Beneath the silence, a question waits, not spoken aloud, not written, only felt, like a thought that does not belong to any single mind. How can a temple be remembered by many, described in careful fragments across centuries, yet never found by any hand that sought it? How can stone leave memories where it leaves no shadow? Whispers tell us that the temple does not rise from the earth. It does not announce itself with pillars or stairs. Instead, it arrives the way dusk does, gradually, and only for those who are no longer measuring time. Dust hangs in the air, caught in pale starlight. Each grain drifts without urgency, suspended as though the night itself has paused. There are no birds, no wind, only the sensation that something ancient is listening. Some believe this plateau is merely a remnant, the outer breath of a sacred place that no longer fully belongs to the world. Others say it was never meant to belong at all. In forgotten corners of the earth, old accounts remain. Pilgrims once wrote of a sanctuary that appeared only at certain hours, usually when the moon was full and the mind was quiet. They described stone walls that shimmered faintly, not with light, but with patience, a geometry that refused to obey distance. Steps that felt longer when approached with certainty, and shorter when walked without intention. Scholars later tried to measure what the pilgrims would not. They traced lines across parchment, calculated angles between stars, aligned the descriptions with known constellations. Yet the numbers resisted. Measurements folded back upon themselves. Distances contradicted distance. One account placed the temple days apart from another, yet both claimed to stand before its gate at the same hour. It is said the temple did not move. Time did. Beneath the silence, the temple became less a structure and more a threshold, not a destination, but a chamber between moments, a place where the past did not recede and the future did not arrive. Stone did not age there. Shadows did not lengthen. Breath slowed until it nearly vanished. Spiritual traditions grew quietly around this idea. Some spoke of sacred places that step aside from time to protect what they hold, not to hide, but to wait. These places were believed to listen rather than reveal. Their gates did not open outward. They opened inward, if at all. The temple's stone gates are described again and again, yet no two descriptions agree. Some say they were tall and narrow, marked by spirals and star-etched dust. Others insist they were low, requiring those who entered to bow, not in reverence, but in surrender. One thing remains constant. The gates were never seen opening. They did not swing. They did not crumble. They listened. Rituals are mentioned, though no ruins confirm them. Soft chants timed to breath rather than words. Hands placed against cold stone until warmth returned. Long pauses where nothing was asked and nothing answered. These rituals were not meant to summon the temple. They were meant to quiet the one who approached it. Emotionally, the story drifts from curiosity into reverent uncertainty. The more one learns, the less solid the temple becomes. Detailed descriptions exist without coordinates, careful drawings without scale, songs written for halls that leave no echo behind. Contradictions multiply gently, like ripples in still water. Some claim the temple revealed itself only once in a lifetime. Others say it appeared whenever searching ceased. A few suggest it was never seen at all, that what pilgrims encountered was the absence of everything they expected to find. Marked by the moon, the temple is said to favor certain nights. Nights when clouds thin and the sky feels closer. Nights when memory loosens its grip and allows older truths to surface. Yet even then, it is said the temple does not appear fully, only enough. A corner of stone, a shadow that feels deliberate, a sudden hush where insects forget their songs. Beneath the silence, the land itself becomes part of the ritual. The plateau reflects no sound. Footsteps soften before they fade. Dust settles slower than it should. Breath becomes audible, then slows, then almost disappears. Those who linger too long are said to lose track of how long they have been there. Not in panic, in peace. Myths echo of travelers who searched for years and never found the temple, only to glimpse it by accident when they had given up hope. Others wrote of standing before it and turning away, unable to cross a threshold that asked nothing and promised nothing. The deeper layers peel back like veils. With each veil removed, there is not revelation, but widening silence. The temple offers no artifact, no inscription to translate. It offers only the experience of standing at the edge of time and realizing that time does not require us. Some believe the temple was built by hands long forgotten, perhaps by a civilization that understood the danger of permanence. Others say it was never built at all, that it formed naturally, the way crystals grow, the way caves hollow themselves patiently into stone. A few whisper that the temple is not made of stone, but of attention, and that it forms wherever the world is truly seen without desire. Historical records trail off without conclusion. Mentions become rarer, softer, as centuries pass. The temple recedes not because it is lost, but because the world grows louder. Fewer pause long enough to notice a place that waits. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, only remembered. The closing reflection returns to stillness. The plateau remains, moonlit and bare. No walls rise, no gates appear, only empty ground and pale dust, glowing gently beneath the stars. Moonlight slides across the stone, slow and indifferent, leaving no mark, yet something lingers. A sense that the temple is still there, just beyond the reach of certainty, waiting, listening, content to remain outside of time, while the world moves on. And as the dust settles, and the breath slows, the silence deepens not as an ending, but as an invitation. Some truths do not ask to be uncovered. They ask only to be remembered, softly, as sleep draws near. It is said that some sounds linger longer than stone. The chapter opens with a bell ringing softly in the air, clear, distant, and unmoored. There is no tower to hold it, no rope to pull, no hand to release the sound. Yet the bell rings all the same, drifting across a valley where grass bends gently in the evening wind. Beneath the silence, the sound feels almost remembered rather than heard, like a lullaby learned before language. Where memory fades, a question settles into the earth. How can an entire city choose absence over ruin? Once, this city was written into ledgers and prayers. Its name appeared in the margins of trade agreements, carved faintly into tablets now worn smooth. Mothers sang it to their children at dusk. Travelers spoke it aloud before sleep, believing the name itself carried protection. Yet now, the name no longer rests comfortably on the tongue. It dissolves as it is spoken, leaving only an echo. Whispers tell us the city stood at a crossing of paths, not merely of roads, but of intentions. Merchants arrived from distant coasts, their caravans heavy with spice and copper. Pilgrims came quietly, guided by stars rather than signs. From above, it was said the streets formed patterns only visible at night, aligned with constellations that have since shifted. The city did not impose itself on the land. It listened first, then settled gently, like dust. In forgotten corners of the earth, fragments remain. A trader's journal describes streets that curved slightly, encouraging slower walking. A priest's record speaks of chambers built to echo with breath rather than sound, spaces where the walls returned only what was offered softly. These were not halls for proclamation, but for listening. Silence was not emptiness there. It was consecrated. Beneath the silence, the city's purpose begins to reveal itself, though never fully. Spiritual traditions suggest it was founded with an ending already in mind. From its first stone, it was meant to withdraw, to step aside once its work was done. The city was not built to endure forever, but to complete something unseen. Rituals marked the passing of seasons, but none marked conquest or expansion. There are no records of walls raised in defense. Instead, there are notes about thresholds, doorways designed to soften sound, courtyards that gathered moonlight and released it slowly. The city was marked by the moon, its festivals timed not to the sun's authority, but to the quieter rhythms of night. Emotionally, the story drifts from wonder into a gentle melancholy. The more lovingly the city is described, the more painful its absence becomes. Accounts begin to diverge. Some say the city sank into the earth, swallowed by water that never left a trace. Others insist it folded inward, stone passing through stone, architecture collapsing not downward but inward, as if returning to itself. Archaeologists later searched for ruins and found only evenly growing grass, no broken columns, no scattered foundations. The land bore no scar. This absence puzzled those who believed destruction must always announce itself. But the city had never wished to be remembered through wreckage. The mystery, then, is not destruction, but intention. Why choose to disappear? Some believe the city reached the end of its purpose, that it had served as a vessel for a knowledge too fragile to survive repetition, a place where certain truths were held briefly, then released. Others whisper of a vow made by its founders, a promise that once their guardianship ended, nothing would remain to tempt power or possession. Beneath the silence, the city's final days are imagined only in fragments. Bells rang, it is said, though no one remembers who rang them. Doors were left open, fires were allowed to burn low, and then go dark. There was no panic, no exodus recorded. The people did not flee. They simply stopped holding the city in place. Stone, freed from memory, returned to dust. Myths speak of a final ritual performed at dusk. Priests walked the star-aligned streets one last time, breathing slowly, touching walls lightly, thanking them. The city did not resist. It did not collapse. It listened. Then, gradually, it withdrew not into legend but into absence. Some say the city still exists, but only as a pause in the air, a place where sound dampens unexpectedly, where footsteps soften, where the night feels deeper. Travelers sometimes report standing in a field and feeling watched not by eyes, but by attention, as if something ancient is making sure nothing is taken. The emotional weight settles gently. Loss without violence, ending without grief. The city's choice reframes disappearance not as failure, but as completion. As dusk deepens, the chapter rests on a quiet hillside. Grass grows evenly here, undisturbed. No stone interrupts the slope. No ruin breaks the line of sight. The sky turns a muted blue, and the first stars appear slightly misaligned from the patterns once traced by streets below. Marked by the moon, the land breathes calmly. Perhaps the city was never meant to be found again. Perhaps its greatest act was restraint, the refusal to leave behind proof. Its absence becomes its final sacred offering, a lesson whispered rather than taught, that some creations honor the world most by knowing when to leave it unchanged. The bell rings once more, softly, without source. Then it fades. Beneath the silence, sleep gathers. The echo remains, unanswered, and that is enough. It is said that memory has weight. The chapter begins with a simple motion, grains of sand slipping through open fingers, slow and patient, each one a forgotten syllable returning to the earth. The sound is faint, almost imagined a soft whisper as the grains fall and disappear. Beneath the silence, the desert stretches outward, vast and pale, its surface shaped by winds that arrive and depart like thoughts. Here, the sand does not rest. It moves as the sea once did, rising and falling in quiet tides beneath the moon. Where memory fades, a rumor endures. They say a library sleeps beneath this desert, not buried in ruin or collapse, but resting alive in its own slow way. A place of gathered knowledge, hidden not by walls, but by patience. A place that breathes with the land above it. Some believe the library was built before the desert learned to wander. Others whisper that the desert came later, summoned as a veil when the world grew too loud. What remains certain is this: no map has ever held the library still. Lines drawn one evening blur by morning. Ink fades, coordinates loosen their meaning. The sand remembers nothing that wishes to be found too quickly. In forgotten corners of the earth, stories survive like mirages. Monks once walked these dunes in silence, their robes the color of dust, their footsteps erased almost as soon as they were made. They carried no books. They memorized instead, believing that knowledge was safest when held in breath rather than ink. These monks spoke of chambers beneath the sand, sealed not by stone, but by waiting. Scrolls rested there, they said. Scrolls written not to be read, but to be remembered. Their symbols were simple spirals, stars, pauses between marks. To read them aloud was considered dangerous. The words were not meant to travel quickly. They were meant to sink, to settle into the listener over a lifetime. Beneath the silence, the library's purpose begins to reveal itself. It was never intended as a place of study. No desks, no lamps, no cataloguing hands. It was a sanctuary for knowing when not to speak. A resting place for truths that could fracture the world if handled without care. Explorers came later, drawn by rumor rather than reverence. They wrote of doors glimpsed at dusk, stone arches half exposed by a receding dune, carved with star-marked spirals and softened by age. By morning, these doors were gone, swallowed whole, as if they had never been. Some explorers swore they descended steps that night, counting each one carefully, only to find themselves standing again beneath open sky when dawn arrived. Maps were made, then remade, then abandoned. One expedition reported that their charts erased themselves as they slept, lines fading into blank parchment, as though the desert refused to be held in memory longer than necessary. Another claimed their compass needles spun gently whenever they approached the suspected site, not in confusion, but in contemplation, slowing until they stopped entirely. Emotionally, curiosity softens into awe. The desert reveals itself not as an obstacle, but as a guardian. Its dunes shift each night, renewing the veil with quiet devotion. Wind smooths the surface, erasing yesterday's intentions. The sand becomes a living script, rewriting itself endlessly, ensuring that nothing beneath is approached with certainty. Spiritual traditions grew around this understanding. Some believed the library would open only when the world above grew still enough to listen. Others believed it would never open again, and that this was its final lesson, that knowledge, once given, must eventually learn how to rest. Beneath the silence, the monks' teachings linger. They spoke of a time when words were heavier than stone, when speaking too quickly could fracture communities, and knowing too much could invite conquest. The library was their answer, a place to place knowledge down, gently, until it was needed again, or until it was no longer needed at all. Contradictions weave through every account. One traveler claimed to hear voices beneath the sand at night, not speaking, but breathing together, as if many minds were dreaming the same dream. Another insisted the library was empty, that the true archive existed only in the act of waiting itself. Scholars debated whether the scrolls were physical at all, or whether the idea of them was the final test, an invitation to let go of proof. Marked by the moon, the desert changes its posture. At full light, the dunes glow softly, their curves catching silver shadows. At new moon, the land disappears into itself, becoming almost indistinguishable from sky. It is during these darkest hours, some say, that the library breathes most clearly. The sand lifts and settles in slow rhythm, as though inhaling and exhaling secrets. No human sound survives long here. Voices fall flat, footsteps soften, even thought seems to slow, unraveling into quieter shapes. Those who linger too long report a strange calm, a loosening of urgency. Questions lose their edges. Answers feel unnecessary. The deeper mystery is not what the library holds, but why it continues to wait. Perhaps the world has not yet grown quiet enough. Perhaps the knowledge within is no longer needed, its purpose fulfilled long ago. Or perhaps the library understands something we do not, that knowing is not always the same as wisdom, and that forgetting can be a form of care. As night deepens, the sand cools. Wind traces gentle spirals across the dunes, erasing the last signs of passage. The desert becomes smooth once more, unmarked, patient. Beneath it all, the library remains sealed, breathing, content. The chapter closes with moonlight resting on the sand, unmoving. No door rises. No stair reveals itself. The land offers only stillness. Perhaps the library was never meant to be opened. Perhaps it was built to teach the world how to wait. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and beneath the silence, sleep arrives like a tide, soft and inevitable. It is said that every gate is a question. The chapter opens in the hush before dawn, when the world holds its breath and the horizon has not yet chosen a color. On a low rise of weathered ground, stands a solitary stone gate. No wall reaches out from its sides. No road approaches its threshold. It stands alone, ancient and deliberate, its surface worn smooth by wind and time. Most curious of all, it does not face the east. It turns instead toward shadow, toward the place where light retreats rather than arrives. Where memory fades, this quiet defiance lingers. Beneath the silence, the gate appears less like an entrance and more like a pause. The stone is cool, veined with faint spirals and star-marked grooves softened by centuries of touch. Dust gathers at its base, undisturbed. Grass grows evenly around it, as if the land itself has learned to respect the space it holds. The rising sun, when it finally appears, slides past the gate without greeting it. Whispers tell us this was never an accident. In forgotten corners of the earth, fragments of history survive etched on broken tablets, mentioned in passing by travelers who did not linger long enough to ask why. These fragments suggest the gate marked a passage not into land, but inward. It was not meant to welcome the day, nor to celebrate beginnings. It turned away from the east to honor something quieter, the ending of motion, the settling of thought. Rituals were once performed here, though no calendar records them. They required no offerings, no spoken prayers, only silence, breath, waiting. Those who approached the gate were instructed to stand before it until their thoughts softened, until the urge to cross faded into stillness. The gate was never locked. There was no barrier, no guard, no warning carved into its stone. Yet few ever crossed its threshold. Beneath the silence, the reason begins to surface. The gate asked nothing, but it offered nothing familiar in return. Spiritual traditions grew around this place, careful and restrained. Some believed the gate was aligned not with the sun, but with the final light of dusk, when shadows lengthen and certainty loosens its grip. To face east was to seek beginnings, birth, conquest, proclamation. To face westward, or toward shadow, was to acknowledge completion. The gate, they said, was built for those who had finished something unseen. Emotion drifts gently from curiosity into calm introspection. The gate does not inspire fear, it invites reflection. Standing before it, travelers reported an unusual quiet, not the absence of sound, but the absence of urgency. Time felt less demanding here. Breath slowed. Thoughts arrived without insistence. Contradictions, however, persist. No two descriptions of what lay beyond the gate agree. One account speaks of a narrow path descending into darkness, lined with smooth stone that reflected no light. Another insists there was nothing beyond at all, only open land, indistinguishable from what lay behind. A third describes a sudden feeling of release, as though something heavy had been set down, though the traveler could not say where. Some claimed the gate led to memory itself, others believed it led to forgetting. Historical references are scarce and gentle, as if even writers felt reluctant to disturb the gate with certainty. A monk once wrote that the gate was a mirror that does not show the face. A scholar noted that it appeared on no boundary line, claimed by no city or kingdom. It belonged to no ruler. It marked no territory. It simply stood, marked by the moon. The gate's presence changes subtly with the night. At full light, its edges glow faintly, and the spirals carved into its surface seem almost to shift, as if following a rhythm older than stone. At new moon, it becomes a darker shape against darkness, nearly invisible unless one knows where to look, yet it never disappears. Beneath the silence, the gate's refusal becomes its meaning. It refuses the language of arrival. It refuses orientation. By turning away from sunrise, it denies the comfort of beginnings and asks the traveler to consider what it means to stop seeking. Some believe the gate was raised during a time of great endings. Not war, not collapse, but completion. A culture that understood when its questions had been asked fully. Instead of building monuments to extend their presence, they built a threshold to step away from it. Others whisper of divine instruction, a command not to advance, but to pause. A betrayal of the expected order of things. Eastward-facing temples promised renewal. This gate promised rest. The emotional current deepens into something like acceptance. The gate does not challenge. It does not test worthiness. It simply waits. Those who turn away from it often do so without regret, carrying with them a subtle quiet that lingers long after they leave. Those who cross, if they cross at all, do not speak of it afterward, not out of fear, but out of an inability to shape the experience into words. Their silence becomes part of the gate's legacy. Beneath the silence, the land around the gate remains unchanged. No ruins gather, no offerings accumulate. The stone does not erode faster or slower than expected. It exists outside of drama, outside of story, and in doing so becomes sacred. As the chapter moves toward its close, dusk settles once more. The light grows dim, and the gate's shadow lengthens across the ground, pointing nowhere in particular. The air cools. The first stars appear, faint and distant, unconcerned with direction. Perhaps the gate was never meant to be used. Perhaps it was built to remind the world that not every threshold demands crossing. The final reflection leaves the gate untouched, bathed in dim light. It offers no promise of revelation, no vision of what lies beyond. Only stillness, only the quiet assurance that endings, too, can be sacred. Beneath the silence, sleep gathers softly. The gate remains, patient and unmoving, turned away from the dawn, waiting for nothing, complete as it is. It is said that water remembers what stone forgets. The chapter opens beneath a wide night sky, where stars scatter themselves across darkness like quiet witnesses. Below them, a river moves without urgency, its surface catching fragments of starlight and carrying them downstream. The water does not rush. It glides, whispering softly against its banks, as though speaking to itself in a language older than sound. If one listens long enough, it seems to murmur not words, but names. Beneath the silence, the river flows as it always has. Yet those who once lived near it believed it did more than carry water. They believed it carried memory. Whispers tell us that this river remembered everyone who touched it, not as faces or stories, but as names held gently, long after voices faded from the world. To step into its current was to be acknowledged. To cup its water in one's hands was to be briefly known. In forgotten corners of the earth, the river appears in fragments of history. It is mentioned in funeral songs, etched faintly into stone markers worn smooth by time. Along its banks, people once gathered not to conquer or trade, but to speak softly and then fall silent. They came at dusk and dawn, when the light was uncertain and the boundary between presence and absence felt thin. Exploration reveals that funeral rites were central to the river's life. The dead were not buried beside it, nor burned upon its shores. Instead, their names were offered to the water, spoken once, never repeated. Families believed the river would carry those names onward, weaving them into its endless movement. In this way, no one was truly lost. They were simply carried. Vows, too, were made along the river's edge. Lovers spoke promises not to one another, but to the water itself. Oaths sworn here were believed to endure longer than memory, because the river listened without judgment. It did not weigh intentions. It only remembered that they were spoken. Beneath the silence, the river became a living archive, a sacred listener. Unlike stone tablets or scrolls, it did not preserve knowledge in symbols. It held it in motion. Each ripple, each eddy, carried fragments of countless lives, names layered gently atop one another, never colliding, never erased. Some believe the river was aligned with the stars, that its curves mirrored constellations no longer visible, patterns that shifted as centuries passed. At night, when moonlight marked its surface, the water seemed to glow faintly, as if illuminated from within. Elders said this was when the river remembered most clearly. Emotion moves slowly from gentle curiosity into tender sorrow. For a place so full of memory, the river is strangely lonely. It remembers everyone, yet belongs to no one. It hears every name, but answers none. Those who lingered too long beside it spoke of a quiet ache, a sense of being known without being held. Accounts conflict as the years unfold. Some say the river dried during a long season of forgetting, that its bed cracked beneath the sun, names settling into dust alongside the water that once carried them. Others insist the river never vanished. It simply learned to flow unseen, slipping beneath the ground, carrying its memories where no eye could follow. Travelers searching for it in later centuries described standing before an empty channel, hearing water without seeing it, a soft murmur beneath their feet, a suggestion of movement below stone and soil. Some claimed that at night, if one lay close to the earth, names could still be heard, faint and overlapping, like breath drifting through sleep. Beneath the silence, scholars debated whether such a river could exist at all. They sought sources, tributaries, explanations, but those who lived closest to the land never asked these questions. To them, the river's truth was not measured by presence or absence, but by remembrance. A thing could disappear from sight and still remain faithful to its purpose. Marked by the moon, the river's story took on new shapes. During full moons, people gathered even after the water was gone or seemed to be gone. They stood where the river once flowed and spoke names into the air. The ground, cool beneath their feet, seemed to listen. Wind moved gently through reeds that had no water to drink. Spiritual traditions grew quietly around this practice. It was believed that speaking a name into silence required more honesty than speaking it aloud to another person. The river, whether visible or hidden, was thought to hear both equally well. Symbols emerged over time. Spirals carved into stones along the former banks represented continuity without return. Broken statues were left facing downward, acknowledging humility before memory. Star-marked markers appeared on hills nearby, pointing not to where the river was, but to where it had been felt most strongly. Emotion deepens into something softer still: acceptance. The river did not promise reunion. It did not offer answers. It simply remembered, and in remembering, it relieved the living of the burden of holding every name alone. Beneath the silence, the idea takes root that memory itself must move to remain gentle. When held too tightly, it becomes weight. When allowed to flow, it becomes passage. The chapter drifts toward its close in darkness. There is no visible water now. The river's path lies hidden beneath shadow and earth, yet the night feels full. The air hums faintly, as if something unseen is still passing through. Perhaps the river never dried. Perhaps it only chose a quieter way to travel. The final image is one of unseen water murmuring in darkness. Names drift like breath, unclaimed, unlost, carried onward without end. Beneath the silence, sleep gathers gently, and the river continues to remember. It is said that some heights do not ask to be reached. The chapter opens at first light, when the world is still deciding whether to wake. A mountain rises from the plain, smooth and pale, its slopes unbroken by trail or scar. Snow rests upon it like a held breath. No switchback cuts its side. No cairn marks a way upward. It stands complete without invitation, its summit untouched by hand or boot. The opening question drifts gently through the cold air. Why did no path ever form? Beneath the silence, the mountain appears less a challenge than a presence. It does not loom. It does not threaten. It simply is quiet, steady, and unconcerned with the passing of seasons below. The wind moves around it rather than against it. Clouds gather, then release their shadows. The mountain remains, smooth as if time itself has learned to pass lightly here. Whispers tell us the mountain was known long before names were given to places. In forgotten corners of the earth, elders spoke of it not as a peak to conquer, but as a witness to be approached with care. They said it watched the turning of ages, the way the sky watches the sea without intervention, without desire. To stand near it was to be seen, and that was enough. Exploration reveals fragments of belief scattered across centuries. Travelers recorded the mountain in margins of journals, noting its unusual stillness. Priests wrote of rituals performed at its base, never above. Offerings were placed on flat stones facing the slope, then left untouched. The act was not one of petition, but acknowledgement. Breath was slowed, voices softened. The mountain was not asked to grant anything. Spiritually, the belief took root that ascent was unnecessary. That understanding did not come from rising higher, but from standing still. The mountain was said to teach by refusing instruction. It offered no steps, no markers, no encouragement. Those who lingered found their thoughts thinning, their urgency dissolving like mist at midday. Emotion settles into humility. The mountain's refusal became its meaning. In cultures accustomed to measuring worth by elevation, by how far one could climb, how much one could claim, this peak offered a quiet contradiction. It suggested that some truths do not reveal themselves through effort. They reveal themselves through patience. Contradictions, however, appear like faint echoes. Reports speak of voices heard at the base not calling, not warning, but murmuring softly, as if the stone itself were remembering something. These voices never followed climbers upward. They lingered only where the ground leveled, where one might stop and listen. Above, there was only silence. Some claimed to hear their own names carried on the wind near the foothills, spoken without sound. Others heard nothing at all, only a deepening quiet that felt deliberate. No account agrees on the nature of the voices, yet all agree they faded with ascent. The higher one climbed, if one tried, the quieter the world became. Marked by the moon, the mountain's face changes subtly at night. Under full light, the snow reflects a pale glow, and the surface seems almost translucent. Under new moon, the peak dissolves into shadow, its outline barely discernible against the sky. Yet no matter the phase, the summit remains untouched. No footprints scar its crown, no flag interrupts its line. Historical attempts to climb the mountain are rare and brief. One expedition, recorded in a single surviving letter, describes men turning back not from exhaustion, but from an unspoken agreement that the climb felt unnecessary. Another account mentions equipment left behind at the base, arranged neatly, as if those who brought it realized it would not be needed. Beneath the silence, the mountain's lesson deepens. It does not forbid ascent, it simply does not reward it. There is no drama in its refusal. No sudden storms rise to turn climbers away. The weather remains calm. The slope remains gentle. And yet, something within those who approach loosens its grip on ambition. Symbols gather quietly around the mountain's story. Spirals carved into stones at its base represent return rather than progress. Star-marked slabs align not with the summit, but with the horizon, reminding observers to look outward rather than upward. Broken statues, found nearby, depict figures seated rather than standing, their faces turned toward the ground. Emotion moves into something softer, still acceptance without resignation. The mountain does not diminish those who stand below it. It equalizes them. Kings and shepherds, scholars and wanderers, all remain at the same height here. The mountain asks nothing of status or strength. It receives all without distinction. Beneath the silence, some believe the mountain listens, not to prayers or pleas, but to breath, to the quiet settling of thought, to the moment when one realizes that not every height must be reached to be understood. As centuries pass, the mountain remains unchanged. Empires rise and fade beyond its horizon. Roads curve around it, never toward it. Maps mark it with careful space, leaving room for what cannot be approached directly. The mountain becomes a pause on parchment, an acknowledgement of restraint. The chapter drifts toward its close as evening falls. Snow catches the last light of day, glowing faintly as the sky darkens. The air cools. Stars appear one by one, distant and indifferent. The mountain stands untroubled, its peak untouched, its slopes smooth. Perhaps the mountain was never meant to be climbed. Perhaps it was meant to remind the world that stillness, too, is a summit. Beneath the silence, sleep gathers gently. The mountain remains, pale and patient, watching without witness, complete without assent. It is said that power leaves a trace, even when untouched. The chapter opens in a chamber of stone where no footsteps echo. At its center, resting upon a low altar worn smooth by time, lies a crown. It is neither large nor ornate. No jewels catch the light. Its surface is dulled by age, its edges softened by dust. Above it, the ceiling opens to the night sky, and starlight falls gently across the metal, as if pausing to consider it. The crown gathers dust in silence. No ruler ever claimed it. Beneath the silence, a question forms without urgency. How can a crown exist without a head to receive it? In forgotten corners of the earth, this crown appears in records only reluctantly. It is mentioned not in triumphs or decrees, but in pauses between lines. Scholars note it in passing, uncertain how to categorize an object that represents authority, yet was never exercised. The crown belonged to a kingdom whose name has thinned with time, surviving only in fragments and softened syllables. What remains clear is not what they ruled, but what they refused. Whispers tell us this kingdom believed power corrupted the breath. To rule was to inhale too deeply of one's own importance, to speak too loudly, to forget the quiet rhythm that bound one life to another. Authority, they believed, should be acknowledged, then set aside like a tool used sparingly, never worn. The crown symbolized this restraint. It was crafted carefully, intentionally incomplete. Ancient metallurgists shaped it from a blend of faded copper and pale gold, alloys chosen not for brilliance but for endurance. Its inner band was smooth, almost tender to the touch, yet no skin ever warmed it. The outer surface bore faint markings, spirals, star points, and open circles, symbols not of command, but of balance. Beneath the silence, the crown was placed on stone rather than velvet. It was meant to be seen, not possessed. To pass it was to acknowledge responsibility without claiming it. Kings were named in this kingdom, yet none were crowned. Leadership existed as a function, not an identity. Historical context unfolds like a slow breath. Councils governed instead of thrones. Decisions were spoken softly and recorded reluctantly. When a leader's time came to an end, there was no ceremony of transfer. The crown remained where it was, unmoved. The next leader did not inherit it. They inherited only the duty to refrain. Emotion shifts from intrigue into quiet respect. The idea unsettles those accustomed to symbols of assent. How could a society function without visible hierarchy? How could obedience arise without spectacle? And yet, records suggest the kingdom endured peacefully for generations. Not without conflict, but without obsession. Power passed like water, not fire. Contradictions remain, gently unresolved. Kings are named in surviving texts, wise figures, mediators, keepers of custom. Yet no account describes a coronation. No artist carved the image of a crowned head. No coin bears the likeness of a ruler adorned with metal authority. The crown remained absent from every portrait, every story of command. Some believe the crown was never meant to be worn because it represented a warning. Others suggest it was worn once, briefly, and the consequences were enough to seal it away forever. There are whispers, never confirmed, of a ruler who lifted the crown in a moment of weakness, felt its weight, and set it down trembling, breath unsteady, voice changed. The records fall silent after this mention, as if even the suggestion required restraint. Beneath the silence, the crown became a presence rather than an object. Children were brought to see it, not to admire, but to understand. Elders taught them that leadership was not something placed upon the head, but something carried quietly within the chest. To breathe evenly was to rule oneself, and that was considered the highest form of governance. Marked by the moon, the crown took on different qualities at night. Under full light, its surface reflected a soft glow, revealing faint imperfections, hammer marks, subtle asymmetries that spoke of human hands choosing not to perfect what was already sufficient. Under new moon, it nearly vanished into shadow, indistinguishable from the stone beneath it. Over time, the kingdom faded, not through conquest or collapse, but through dispersion. Its people moved outward, carrying the philosophy with them, like an unspoken inheritance. The crown remained behind. It was not taken. It was not hidden. It simply stayed where it had always been, waiting for no one. Archaeologists later found the chamber intact. No signs of looting, no shattered symbols. The crown lay as it always had. Dust settled evenly across its curve. They debated its purpose, its significance. Some argued it was ceremonial. Others called it symbolic propaganda. Few understood the depth of its refusal. Emotion deepens into reverence. The crown's power lies precisely in its restraint. It does not command attention. It does not demand reverence. It simply exists, complete in its denial of use. In a world marked by ambition, the crown's stillness becomes its voice. Beneath the silence, the chamber feels balanced. Sound softens. Light lingers. Even the dust seems reluctant to move. The crown is not lonely. It is sufficient unto itself. As the chapter drifts toward its close, night deepens. The stars shift slightly overhead. The crown remains unmoved, unchanged. No footsteps approach. No hand reaches out. The stone beneath it holds steady. Perhaps the crown was never meant to be worn. Perhaps it was meant to remind the world that authority, when claimed too tightly, forgets how to breathe. The final image lingers on the crown beneath starlight, dust-covered, untouched, complete in its refusal. Beneath the silence, sleep gathers gently, and the crown continues to rest, unburdened by history, faithful to stillness. It is said that time, like breath, can be followed in either direction. The chapter opens in a dim chamber, where the air feels settled and unhurried. A stone tablet rests on a low surface, its edges worn smooth by centuries of touch. Upon it, numbers are carved, not ascending, but retreating. Fingers trace them slowly, moving not forward, but back. Each symbol feels familiar yet distant, like a memory recalled in reverse. Where memory fades, the first question forms softly. What kind of world begins at the end? Beneath the silence, the calendar waits. In forgotten corners of the earth, fragments of this object have been uncovered: stone slabs, bone tallies, woven cords knotted in careful sequence. All share the same quiet defiance of expectation. The final day is placed at the beginning. The first day rests at the far end, barely marked, almost shy. This calendar does not count progress. It measures approach. Exploration uncovers a culture that did not believe time moved toward achievement. They believed it moved toward quiet. Each passing day was not an accumulation, but a release. Time, to them, was a veil layered, delicate, meant to be lifted slowly until nothing remained to obscure stillness. Beneath the silence, the calendar was not hung on walls or consulted hurriedly. It was kept low, near the ground. Elders sat beside it at dusk, tracing its markings with unbroken attention. Children were taught not to ask what day it was, but how close they felt to silence. The calendar answered not with urgency, but with patience. Spiritually, this culture understood time as something that softened with use. The farther one moved along the calendar, the fewer marks appeared. Early days were dense with symbols, stars, spirals, echoes of ritual. Later days were bare. The final day held no marking at all. Emotion drifts gently into serene disorientation. To read the calendar was to feel the loosening of sequence. Morning did not follow night so much as dissolve into it. Festivals marked not beginnings, but endings. Harvests celebrated not what was gathered, but what could now be laid down. Scholars who later encountered fragments of this system disagreed on its purpose. Some argued it was ceremonial, a symbolic inversion meant to challenge linear thinking. Others believed it was practical, a way to mark the gradual retreat from labor toward rest. A few suggested it was a form of spiritual preparation, guiding a society gently toward disappearance. Contradictions surface like soft ripples. The calendar appears in temples, yet no gods are named beside it. It is found near burial sites, yet it does not mark death. It accompanies records of trade and governance, yet it does not count reigns or conquests. It exists alongside life without attempting to control it. Beneath the silence, the calendar's markings reveal subtle patterns. Certain symbols repeat at irregular intervals: crescent shapes aligned with lunar cycles, star points that appear only once, then never again. These were not reminders of dates, but of moments, times when the world felt thinner, quieter, more receptive. Marked by the moon, the calendar was often consulted at night. Torchlight softened its edges. Shadows moved slowly across its surface, creating the illusion that the numbers themselves were drifting backward. Elders believed this was not illusion, but alignment. Time, they said, behaves differently when observed without haste. Emotion settles into acceptance. To live by this calendar was to release the fear of running out. There was no rush toward achievement, no pressure to arrive. Each day brought one closer to rest, and rest was not failure, it was fulfillment. Beneath the silence, the culture that kept this calendar began to fade. Not abruptly, not violently. They withdrew from trade routes. They stopped building outward. Their cities grew quieter, then smaller, then gently returned to the land. The calendar remained, counting backward, even as fewer eyes traced its path. Some believe the final day arrived long ago. Others say it has not yet come, that the calendar continues to count somewhere unseen, guiding those who feel its rhythm without knowing its name. A few whisper that the calendar was never meant to finish, that its final day was a concept rather than a moment. The day when time itself could be set down. As the chapter draws toward its close, the calendar rests in darkness once more. The fingers that traced it have long since turned to dust. The numbers remain, though softened, their edges blurred by touch and time. The beginning waits quietly at the far end, unremarked. Perhaps the calendar was never meant to measure days. Perhaps it was meant to teach the art of letting go. The final image is gentle and unresolved. The last day arrives first, then fades into calm. Beneath the silence, sleep gathers softly, and time, for a moment, loosens its grip. It is said that some shores remember the sea long after it has gone. The chapter opens beneath a dim, breath-held sky, where stone meets emptiness. A harbour lies open and exposed, its shape unmistakable even in absence. Curving docks extend into dry air. Mooring posts stand worn and rounded, polished smooth by hands that are no longer remembered. Along the harbour walls, ships are carved into stone, prows lifted, sails etched mid-billow, forever arriving, forever waiting. Yet there is no water here, no salt in the wind, only silence, stretched wide where waves once breathed. Beneath the silence, a question settles gently into the dust. What were these ships waiting for? Where memory fades, the harbour remains precise in its emptiness. Stone steps descend carefully, evenly, as if designed for tides that never returned. Channels cut into the rock curve inward, guiding nothing now. The air holds a faint coolness, a suggestion rather than a presence, as though the sea had passed through recently and left its breath behind. Whispers tell us this was once a place of arrival, not for cargo or conquest, but for something more difficult to name. In forgotten corners of the earth, travellers wrote of a harbour that did not open to the ocean, yet was never considered landlocked. They spoke of standing at its edge and feeling movement without motion, like standing beneath a night sky dense with stars. Exploration reveals myths layered gently atop one another, none insisting on certainty. Some say tides of light once arrived here slow, luminous currents that rolled in beneath the moon, touching stone without wetting it. These tides did not carry ships of wood or sail. They carried moments, memories, the quiet weight of departure. Spiritually, the harbour was believed to welcome journeys inward. Those who came here were not leaving a place, but releasing something held too tightly. The carved ships were not vessels for crossing water. They were symbols of readiness. Each one pointed inward, toward the heart of the harbour, rather than outward toward the horizon. Beneath the silence, rituals unfolded without urgency. Stones near the dock were worn flat, not by waves, but by waiting. People sat there at dusk, facing the carved fleet, breathing slowly. No one boarded, no one departed. The act of coming was enough. Emotion drifts gently into longing. The harbour holds the ache of anticipation, without fulfillment. Anchors are carved into the quay, detailed and heavy, yet no chains connect them to anything. Roots are etched into nearby walls, lines that curve and spiral, leading nowhere the eye can follow. They do not correspond to coastlines or stars. Scholars later debated their meaning, unable to reconcile paths without oceans. Contradictions persist, soft and unresolved. Why build a harbour without water? Why carve ships that would never sail? Some suggest the sea retreated suddenly, leaving the city stranded. Others insist the sea was never here at all, that the harbour was built in expectation, not response. Marked by the moon, the harbour's character changes with the night. Under full light, the stone gleams faintly, and the carved ships appear almost afloat, their shadows moving subtly as the moon crosses the sky. Under new moon, the harbour becomes a hollow bowl of darkness, its shape sensed more than seen. Beneath the silence, the idea emerges that the harbour was aligned not with tides of water, but with tides of time. Certain nights were said to feel fuller here, as if something unseen arrived and lingered briefly before withdrawing. Those who stood quietly reported a sense of passage not forward, not backward, but inward. Historical fragments mention pilgrims who came only once. They arrived carrying nothing and left carrying nothing, yet described the journey as complete. No record explains what was received, only that something had been set down. Emotion deepens into a soft ache, the longing not for return, but for recognition. The harbour does not mourn the sea, it remembers it, and in remembering, it preserves the space where movement once mattered. Beneath the silence, the harbour becomes a mirror. Those who approach it feel their own waiting reflected back. The ships carved into stone never age. Their sails never tear. They exist outside of consequence, faithful to anticipation alone. Some believe the harbour was a threshold between worlds. That water was never required, because the crossing was not physical. Others whisper that the harbour marked the end of an age, when journeys outward had exhausted their meaning, and the world turned inward instead. As centuries passed, the city surrounding the harbour thinned and faded. Buildings crumbled, roads filled with dust. Yet the harbour endured, spared by neglect rather than preservation. No one dismantled it. No one repurposed its stone. It was left intact, as if removing it would disturb something delicate. Beneath the silence, the harbour waits still, not for ships, not for waves, but for the moment when longing softens into acceptance. The chapter drifts toward its close as night deepens. Moonlight pools in the basin where water once moved, collecting softly in the curves of stone. The light shifts gently, mimicking the rhythm of tides long gone. Shadows ripple across the carved hulls, giving the brief illusion of departure. Perhaps the harbour was never meant to hold water. Perhaps it was built to hold the space water leaves behind. The final image lingers on the moonlit stone, quiet and patient. Waves do not return. They are not needed. Beneath the silence, the harbour remains open, and sleep arrives like a tide that asks nothing, carries nothing away. It is said that before the first word was spoken, there was silence, and that when all words are finished, silence returns to gather what remains. This chapter opens not with an image, but with a pause, a breath held longer than expected, a moment where nothing asks to be seen. Beneath the silence, there is a place the world learned not to describe. No horizon announces it, no ruin defines its outline. Those who came closest never agreed on what they encountered, only on what was absent. Sound entered this place once and never returned. Where memory fades, stillness remains. In forgotten corners of the earth, records speak of a final ritual. They do not describe it in detail. They circle it. They approach it carefully, as if even ink feared to disturb what followed. A gathering is implied, not witnessed. A preparation is suggested, not explained. Then quiet. No thunder. No collapse. No farewell carved into stone. Just the ending of noise. Whispers tell us this place was once alive with ceremony. Bells rang here, though their metal is long dissolved. Voices rose and fell in rhythm, though no echo clings to the air now. Fires burned, casting light on walls that no longer stand. Yet none of these things remain, not as ruin, not as ash. Only the silence endured. Beneath the silence, the land itself feels altered. The ground does not absorb sound as soil should. It does not reflect it either. Footsteps soften unnaturally, as if the earth has learned how to listen without replying. Wind passes through without whisper. Birds circle wide and do not land. Exploration here is minimal by necessity. Those who linger too long describe a gentle pressure, not discomfort, but a reminder, as though the place is complete and does not wish to be added to. Scholars who arrived with instruments found their tools ineffective. Sound registered, then vanished. Vibrations faded before they could return data. Measurements ended where explanation would normally begin, and so they stopped measuring. Spiritually, traditions formed around this absence. Some believed the silence was intentional, a final act of devotion, a culture that chose to leave nothing behind but rest. They believed the world had grown too loud, too crowded with meaning, and that the only sacred act remaining was to withdraw completely. Others believed the silence was not an ending, but a containment, that something too fragile, too powerful, or too unresolved had been sealed not beneath stone, but beneath quiet itself. Silence, after all, leaves no cracks. Emotion settles slowly into acceptance. At first, there is discomfort. The mind searches for detail, for explanation, for the shape of the thing that is missing. But as moments stretch gently onward, the searching softens. The need to know loosens. The silence does not resist curiosity, it simply outlasts it. Contradictions dissolve here, not because they are resolved, but because they no longer matter. Some accounts claim the silence arrived suddenly, like a door closing. Others insist it descended gradually, sound thinning until it no longer knew how to return. A few say nothing happened at all, that the place simply became what it always was. Marked by the moon, the silence deepens at night. Under moonlight, the land appears almost translucent, as if absence itself were illuminated. Shadows gather, but do not move. Even time seems reluctant to pass quickly here. Minutes stretch, breaths slow. Beneath the silence, the idea emerges that nothing more was meant to be known. The final ritual, whatever it was, did not seek remembrance. There are no inscriptions asking to be understood, no warnings, no promises, only the suggestion that the act was complete the moment it ended. To leave questions unanswered was not failure, it was fidelity. Those who approach this place in later centuries speak of a profound calm, not peace, exactly something quieter, a sense that the world is capable of resting without explanation, that history does not need to resolve every thread in order to be whole. Ruins nearby crumble normally. Stone falls, moss grows, life continues. But within the boundary of the silence, nothing accumulates. Dust settles slowly, evenly, as if gravity itself has learned restraint. The air holds still, neither stale nor fresh. Beneath the silence, sleep feels close. Perhaps the place was never meant to be found. Perhaps it was meant to remain untouched, unnamed, unremembered in detail. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some truths arrive only when we stop asking them to speak. As the chapter draws toward its end, nothing changes. No final image appears. No sound returns to mark completion. The silence does not deepen or recede. It simply is wide, patient, and sufficient. The world exhales around it, and in that stillness, rest arrives naturally, like nightfall without sunset. The silence that was left behind remains sacred, unresolved, and whole. It is said that there are nights when the sky leans closer to the earth. The chapter opens beneath a velvet sky, so deep and dark it seems to absorb sound itself. Constellations glow with unusual clarity, not distant or indifferent, but near close enough to feel like listeners. The stars appear suspended, as if pausing in their endless movement. Below them, half buried by time and dust, rests a circular sanctuary of stone. Its walls are smooth and pale. Its shape is perfect. And once, long ago, its ceiling was open to the heavens. Beneath the silence, starlight once fell through that opening, like breath through lungs, slow, measured, alive. The opening question does not demand an answer. It simply waits. Why would a place built to see the stars choose, one night, to turn away from them? Where memory fades, the star chamber survives only in fragments. No complete map leads to it. No single record describes it fully. What remains are scattered memories, half-lines in priestly journals, weathered stones etched with curves that resemble paths of light rather than language. The chamber was never meant for study. It was meant for encounter. Whispers tell us the priests who tended the chamber did not chart the sky. They did not name the stars or divide them into measures. Instead, they waited. They believed certain constellations crossed an unseen gate overhead, moments when the sky was briefly aligned with the inner world of those below. On those nights, the chamber filled with light, not bright, not blinding, but intimate, as if the stars were breathing with the stone. Beneath the silence, the chamber functioned as a meeting place, not between people and gods, but between attention and vastness. The stars were not observed. They were invited. Spiritual belief unfolded gently around this idea. The sky, they believed, grows weary of being watched. To measure something endlessly is to forget its mystery. Sacred seeing, they taught, required moments of blindness. One must know when to close the eyes. The chamber's stones reflect this philosophy. Their surfaces bear no inscriptions of dates or names. Instead, faint star-marked spirals curve along the walls, tracing the movement of light rather than time. Some symbols appear only once, never repeated, as if honoring moments that could not return. Emotion drifts from wonder into reverence. On certain nights, marked by the moon's position rather than its fullness, the priests gathered silently within the chamber. No chants echoed, no instrument sounded. Breath slowed, eyes lifted, and the sky responded, offering its quiet presence without explanation. Then, one night, the light did not come. As the exploration deepens, contradictions surface like faint echoes in an empty hall. Some accounts claim the chamber collapsed inward, stone folding gently into itself, sealing the opening without violence. Others insist the ceiling closed smoothly, as if guided by intention, two great arcs meeting in silence, like eyelids coming together. Travelers who arrived later wrote of standing within the chamber and feeling warmth without light. The stone retained a subtle heat, as though the stars had departed only moments before. Some described running their hands along the walls and sensing a softness, not physical, but emotional, the residue of something recently concluded. Emotion shifts into a gentle sadness. Not loss, exactly, but the feeling of arriving after a farewell has already taken place. No debris marked the closure. No rubble lay scattered. The chamber was intact, complete, yet altered. Above, the sky remained unchanged, stars moving as they always had. Below, the sanctuary rested in shadow, its purpose fulfilled. Beneath the silence, debate arose. Scholars argued whether the chamber had failed, whether its builders miscalculated alignment or weathered catastrophe. But those who lingered longer sensed something else entirely. The chamber had not failed. It had finished. Marked by the moon, the chamber now behaves differently. Moonlight enters through narrow seams between stones, tracing faint arcs across the floor. These arcs do not correspond to any known phase or cycle. They appear and fade without pattern, like memories surfacing in sleep. Some believe the chamber closed its eyes to protect what it had received. Others say it was an act of mercy, an acknowledgement that the sky, too, needs privacy. To be seen endlessly is to be diminished. Beneath the silence, the chamber feels whole. The absence of starlight does not feel like deprivation. It feels like rest, like a room after the guests have departed, still warm with presence, content in quiet. Emotion settles into acceptance. The final reflection lingers inside the darkened sanctuary. No stars fall now. No breath of light descends. And yet, the space feels complete. Stone holds its shape without longing. The air is still, but not empty. Perhaps the chamber was never meant to remain open forever. Perhaps it was built to witness something only once. Some truths reveal themselves briefly, then withdraw, trusting memory more than stone, and silence more than record. As dust settles gently across the floor, the sky continues on above, unseen but present. The stars do not disappear. They simply stop arriving here, and in that refusal, the chamber rests. Beneath the silence, sleep gathers like night itself, soft, inevitable, and kind. It is said that there is an hour when the world loosens its grip. The chapter begins in that hour, the brief, breath-held moment between day and night, when shadows lengthen and certainty softens. The sun has already lowered its voice. The sky has not yet chosen its stars. In this thinning light, bare ground lies quiet and unremarkable, a plain of dust and stone that has learned how to be overlooked. Then, slowly, as if remembering itself, pale stones begin to show. Not rising, not moving, simply becoming visible. A path reveals itself without announcement. Beneath the silence, the question arrives gently. What destination requires such careful timing to reach? The stones do not glow. They do not demand attention. They emerge only enough to be noticed by those who have learned how to wait. At dawn, they are gone. Under full night, they vanish again. Only at dusk, only when the world exhales, does the path agree to exist. Whispers tell us this path has been known for longer than memory has kept count. In forgotten corners of the earth, pilgrims spoke of it in softened tones, as if loud words might frighten it away. They did not mark its location on maps. They described the light instead, the way the air felt thinner, the way sound seemed to arrive late. Exploration traces the quiet devotion of those who waited. Some waited years, some waited entire lifetimes. They returned to the same stretch of ground evening after evening, sitting with the dust, watching the light change. Not all were rewarded. Many never saw the stones appear, yet they returned anyway, believing that waiting itself was part of the journey. Those who did see the path rarely spoke of it clearly. Some said they followed it for only moments, though the experience stayed with them for years. Others claimed to walk it for decades, though their steps were few and close together. Distance behaved strangely here. Time folded inward, then loosened. Spiritually, the path was believed to exist between intentions. It was not summoned by desire, nor revealed through effort. It appeared only when desire loosened its grip, when wanting gave way to readiness. To walk it required patience rather than motion, attention rather than direction. Beneath the silence, rituals formed without structure. No chants accompanied the walk. No offerings were placed along the stones. Pilgrims were advised to empty their hands and soften their breath, to walk lightly, not because the stones were fragile, but because intention was. Emotion moves gently from curiosity into calm surrender. Descriptions of the destination never agree. This contradiction becomes the heart of the mystery. Some pilgrims spoke of arriving at a garden without flowers, a space lush with presence but absent of form. Others described a chamber filled with wind and breath, where sound moved freely but meaning did not cling. A few claimed the path led them back to where they began, yet something within them had shifted, quietly and permanently. Many found nothing at all, no garden, no chamber, no revelation they could name. And yet, they returned, changed, quieter, less burdened, as if something heavy had been set down along the way without ceremony. They spoke less, they listened more, they slept more easily. Beneath the silence, scholars later debated the nature of such a path. Some dismissed it as illusion, an artifact of light and expectation. Others suggested it marked a natural phenomenon, stones exposed by subtle shifts in temperature and shadow. But these explanations failed to account for the consistency of transformation among those who walked it. Marked by the moon, the path behaved differently with each phase. On nights nearing fullness, the stones appeared sooner, then faded gently. On darker evenings, they waited longer, revealing themselves only at the very edge of night. The path did not hurry. It did not linger. It followed its own rhythm, indifferent to schedules and plans. Symbols gathered quietly around the path's story. Spirals carved into nearby rocks suggested movement without destination. Star-marked stones lay scattered at the edges, not pointing the way, but acknowledging the sky's role as witness. Dust gathered evenly between the stones, undisturbed, as if the path preferred to be touched lightly, if at all. Emotion settles into acceptance. The path does not promise arrival. It does not offer proof. By morning, it leaves no trace. The stones sink back into earth, indistinguishable from the ground around them. No marker remains. No sign confirms what was seen. Those who missed it doubt themselves. Those who walked it do not argue. Beneath the silence, the realization emerges that some journeys are meant to be taken without arrival. That movement can be inward, and progress measured by release rather than gain. The path does not lead somewhere else. It leads away from urgency. As dusk deepens once more, the chapter watches the stones fade back into earth. Night completes its veil. The ground returns to stillness. The path does not resist disappearance. It has finished what it came to do. Perhaps the destination was never a place. Perhaps it was the hour itself. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some paths appear only when we have learned how to wait. The dusk settles fully now. Breath slows. Thought softens. Rest arrives without effort, like nightfall, quiet, inevitable, and kind.